Hello, and welcome to the Whoever Podcast, a Christian podcast for non-Christians. I'm Andrew.
I'm Brian, and today we are coming to you from Mark chapter 8. We're going to start at verse 22. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more Jesus put his hands in the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
Yeah, so we've got Jesus has moved well into his ministry at this point. He's become, in his little corner of the world, pretty famous and well known, and people are like bringing sick people to him and saying, you know, "Rabbi, teacher, would you heal this person?" And that's what happens with this blind man. As Jesus is walking along, a group of people bring him into town and present him to Jesus, and they've realized that Jesus touching someone can heal them, so they say, "Would you touch this person?" because they want him to be able to see.
Right, and it's interesting that this is, I might be wrong in this, but I think this is the only miracle that happens in stages. It seems like, at least as to my recollection, everything else that Jesus does, it all happens at once. He heals somebody and they're healed. But here, we see that it's like a process where Jesus does something first. He spits on the guy's eyes and asks him if he sees anything. And the guy says, "Well, like, I kind of see, but it looks a little blurry. You know, people look like trees walking around." And then he puts his hand on him, and then his eyes are open and he can see. And so there's a process here. What do you think is up with that?
I'm not sure. The Bible doesn't tell us. We don't know why Jesus did it this way. One thing that seems to be different about this one, often the gospel writer will tell us, well, this person had been blind from birth. Here it doesn't say that, and we would assume, because the guy says, well, they look like trees, that perhaps at some point in his life he's seen trees. So this could have been an accident that caused him to go blind, or obviously a disease, but it seems like maybe this was he hadn't been blind his whole life, probably.
Maybe he just had some dirt in his eye. I was like, "No, it's fine. I got this." He just spits in his eye and cleans it out a bit.
I don't think it was that.
That's not it.
But yeah, we don't know why. Why did Jesus, what was it about this situation that caused him to heal him and then kind of ask this question and then finish healing him?
Yeah, the only thing whenever I read this, I always am struck by the fact that there's a process here, and we don't know why that process is, but at least for me, an application of this, one of the things that teaches us about how God works in our lives today is that there is a process, and that God does fix us, God does transform us, He heals us spiritually, physically, He helps us, but it's not necessarily all at once. You know, we just did an episode last week about unanswered prayers, and I think sometimes we get frustrated because we want Jesus to help us now and do things right away and make it happen, but sometimes it's a process and it takes a while.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we can find that God's response, the way that he does something for me, is not going to be identical to the way that he does something for Brian.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus had healed other people who were blind. It's obvious that the things he's doing physically with spitting and touching him and these things aren't necessary. It's not, Jesus isn't performing a magical spell that causes him to do things, right? He does these things for whatever reason. Probably it has something to do with the mental state of the person that he's healing, and later on he might heal someone who's blind in a different way.
Yeah, and I think too, this shows us that God works with us, and so there's an encouragement here that if you've been waiting on an answer for God, or you're waiting for God to do something, I just want to encourage you that sometimes it's a process, and God works us through the process because, like Andrew said, He knows what we need better than we do. maybe God knows that an immediate answer to your prayer is not what you need right now. Maybe you need to go through this process. That doesn't always make the process easy, but there is an encouragement in knowing that God has a purpose in the process, because it takes a while. And we see that in the next half of what we talked about here with Peter confessing the Messiah. Jesus asks, hey, who am I? And they talk about, well, we've heard this other thing, but Peter's like, you're the Messiah. And this took a while to get to. Peter's been traveling around with them for a long time. He's seen the miracles. He's heard the teaching. Peter went through a process to finally arrive here.
Yeah, other people are like, well, we get that there's something about Jesus. Maybe he's John the Baptist brought back. You'll remember John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin, was executed, and so they say, well, maybe he's John again, or maybe he's Elijah, or one of these Old Testament prophets that we've read about. And Peter says, well, no, I've, in sort of this fullness of understanding, having spent time with you, you are the Messiah. You're this person that God promised he was going to send, that was going to, in some way that we don't understand, fix what's wrong with the world.
Right. And the Messiah, this is a really big deal. This verse 29 here is Mark chapter 8, verse 29. Peter confessing that Jesus is the Messiah. Mm-hmm. This is a turning point in the entire book of Mark. Coming up to this point, we've been exploring this idea of who is Jesus, what did he come here to do, how does he act, what does he teach us, and here we see now he is indeed the Messiah. This means that he's the one that's come to save God's people. He's the one that came to save me and Andrew and you, who's listening and watching. This is what it means that Jesus is the Messiah. And moving forward, we're going to see that there's a drastic shift now in what Jesus is doing. He still does some miracles and he still does some teaching, but now he's moving on to the next phase of his ministry, where he's marching towards the cross.
Yeah, Peter would have been aware of the Old Testament, right? The same one that you can read. Peter would have had this, and he would have read in Genesis when, after the fall, there is this promise that at some point this person's going to come and fix things. Or when God is talking to David, there's this promise that from this line that is going to come this person. Or throughout the prophets, there are these references to the Christ and the Messiah who's going to come. And Peter sort of pieces these things together and says, well, I think he's here. This is him.
Amen to that. I think that's about all we got for this one. But it's going to be exciting to see what comes next as Jesus now begins his march towards the cross. If you got any questions, feel free to comment below or reach out to one of us. Until then, we'll catch you next time. Bye.